The dinner crowd at Le Chateau, an upscale French restaurant tucked into Manhattan's elite Upper East Side, buzzed with the low hum of clinking glasses and murmured conversations. Among the staff, there was Ella, a young black waitress with a quiet grace and an air of resilience. She worked tirelessly, navigating the tables with practiced ease, but tonight, her shift would be far from ordinary. Seated at one of the most coveted tables was Vincent Crawford, a man known less for his wealth and more for his sharp tongue and cruel sense of humor. Draped in an expensive suit and exuding an air of entitlement, he was the type who saw every interaction as an opportunity to flaunt his superiority. Beside him sat his equally pretentious friends, laughing at his every word, no matter how biting. Ella approached the table with a tray of champagne, her smile polite but reserved. "Ah, here she comes," Vincent drawled loudly, his voice cutting through the ambiance. "The star of the evening. Tell me, sweetheart, what's it like serving people who probably make more in an hour than you do in a year?" His friends chuckled, but Ella's smile didn't falter. "I wouldn't know, sir. I don't focus on what others make. I just focus on doing my best." Her composed response only seemed to irk him. He leaned back in his chair, swirling his glass of wine. Then his eyes landed on the grand piano in the corner of the restaurant, a beautiful black Steinway that was played by a hired pianist during dinner service. A cruel smirk spread across his face. "You know, I've always wondered if servers have any hidden talents. What about you? Can you play that thing?" Ella hesitated, unsure of his intent. "I can, sir. A little." The smirk grew wider. "A little? Well, let's see it then. Entertain us. Play something elegant." But before we dive into what happens next, I'd love to know, where are you tuning in from today? Drop a comment below. The challenge wasn't a compliment. It was a trap. His tone dripped with mockery, and his friends leaned forward, eager for the spectacle. The pianist on duty, sensing the tension, started to protest, but Vincent waved him off. Ella glanced around the room. All eyes were on her now, some curious, others sympathetic. The restaurant manager, too timid to intervene, gave her a subtle nod as if to say, "It's okay, just do it." Ella set down her tray, her heart pounding. She hadn't touched a piano in months, not since her mother's funeral, but this wasn't about Vincent anymore. This was about dignity, hers and every other person who had ever been humiliated by someone like him. She walked to the piano with her head held high, her uniform catching the warm glow of the chandelier above. As she sat down, the room seemed to hold its breath. Vincent's voice cut through the silence. "Play something. Dramatic. Show us what you've got." Ella placed her fingers on the keys, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath. Then, she began to play. The opening notes of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata filled the room, soft and haunting, each note flowing seamlessly into the next. The melody was tender yet commanding, a testament to the raw power of music. Ella's fingers danced over the keys with a mastery that silenced even the most skeptical onlookers. Vincent's smug grin faltered as the music swelled. Ella transitioned into a fiery rendition of Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor, her hands moving faster than the eye could follow. The sheer passion and precision of her performance left the room stunned. By the time she segued into a soulful improvisation that blended jazz and classical elements, the entire restaurant was entranced. Some diners had tears in their eyes, others clapped their hands in rhythm with the music. Ella poured her soul into the performance, transforming the piano into an extension of herself. When the final note lingered in the air, the room erupted into applause. Diners stood, cheering and whistling, their earlier meals forgotten in the wake of her talent. Ella rose from the piano, her gaze steady as she looked directly at Vincent. For the first time all evening, he was speechless. His cheeks burned red, his friends too stunned to offer him support. The man who had set out to demean her was now the object of pity, exposed as the small, petty individual he was. Without a word, Ella returned to her tray and resumed her work. But from that moment on, she was no longer just a waitress at Le Chateau. She was an artist, a force of nature who had turned ridicule into reverence, and her story would become the talk of Manhattan for weeks to come. And as for Vincent Crawford, he learned that wealth might command attention, but respect is earned, a lesson he'd never forget. Vincent sat frozen, his glass of wine untouched. The ripple of applause still echoed in his ears, but he couldn't bring himself to look up. His friends exchanged awkward glances, their earlier laughter now replaced with an uneasy silence. The power Vincent had wielded so confidently moments before had crumbled, leaving him exposed. Ella, meanwhile, moved through the restaurant with the same grace she had always carried, as though nothing extraordinary had happened. But the diners saw her differently now. Some stopped her to compliment her performance, others asked her name, and a few whispered words of encouragement. "Excuse me," a woman called softly from a nearby table. She was dressed elegantly, her gray hair pulled back into a sleek bun. "Are you a professional pianist?" Ella paused, shaking her head with a humble smile. "No, ma'am. I just play for myself. My mother taught me when I was little." The woman's eyes softened. "You should be performing on stages, not serving tables. That was remarkable." Ella thanked her, but didn't linger. She knew compliments like that, while kind, wouldn't change her reality. She still had bills to pay and a shift to finish. Across the room, Vincent finally stirred. He pushed back his chair abruptly, causing his glass to tip and spill wine across the pristine white tablecloth. His friends recoiled slightly, sensing his growing frustration. "I need some air," he muttered, grabbing his coat and storming out of the restaurant. Outside, the crisp night air did little to cool his temper. He paced along the sidewalk, replaying the scene in his head. How had a simple waitress managed to outshine him in front of everyone? He wasn't used to being humbled, and he didn't know how to handle it. As he stood there, the sound of the restaurant door opening drew his attention. Ella stepped outside, holding a bag of trash for the evening cleanup. She didn't notice him at first, too focused on her task. "Hey!" Vincent called, his voice sharper than he intended. Ella turned, her expression calm but guarded. "Yes, sir?" He hesitated, the words he wanted to say tangled in his throat. "You're good at that. The piano, I mean." Ella raised an eyebrow, unsure if this was another setup for mockery. "Thank you." Vincent shifted uncomfortably. He had never apologized to anyone before, let alone someone he considered beneath him. But tonight had shaken something in him. "Look," he began, running a hand through his hair. I didn't expect—" He trailed off, struggling to find the right words. Finally, he sighed. "You're talented. More talented than anyone I've ever seen. And I was wrong to treat you the way I did." Ella studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "You don't need to explain yourself to me," she said evenly. "But if you're serious about what you just said, maybe think about how you treat people next time. Not everyone gets the chance to prove themselves the way I did tonight." Her words hit Vincent harder than he expected. He nodded slowly, the weight of her statement sinking in. As Ella walked back inside, Vincent stood alone on the sidewalk, feeling something unfamiliar. Shame, yes, but also admiration. For the first time in years, he found himself questioning who he was and the kind of legacy he was leaving behind. Back in the restaurant, Ella returned to her work, knowing this night would be one she would never forget. Not because of Vincent Crawford or his attempt to humiliate her, but because she had risen above it. She had shown the world, even if only for a moment, the strength and beauty of her spirit. And for that, she was proud. Drop a comment if you enjoyed this story. It doesn't cost you anything, and you'll make me very happy. Thank you, and I look forward to your like.